emergency hotline.
There's been a train derailment involving a shipment of toxic chemicals.
I want to report some chemical dumping near where I live.
We think there may have been some dumping of hazardous materials in the area.
There are horrible odors
Getting
originating
complaints
from
from
wooded areas.
residential areas have been having problems with their drinking water. The residents are also reporting reservoirs.
The unsafe disposal of hazardous waste is a problem that's been literally dumped on America's consciousness. We're going to examine the story of one abandoned hazardous waste site and how it was cleaned up. Welcome to Cecil County, Maryland, a small rural area nestled between the Northeast River and the Chesapeake Bay along Interstate 95. There's a mobile home community of 500 families, a summer camp, and a few miles down the road is the town of Northeast. Life was normal in Cecil County until residents started to share many of the same complaints.
There's like a pond back there, and the water in it would change colors, you know. Well, one day it'd be green, the next day blue.
I usually run past there and everything, and when I smelled it, and it did have a bad odor back there.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, man, it smelled like a cesspool somewhere. I thought it was cesspools back there across the road.
We had a complaint. Some people out there were complaining of odors and that there was some dumping back there. We went out and investigated that.
Ron Nelson is director of Maryland's Waste Management Administration.
And some drums did show up when we went back in the spring. At that point, we did a much more intensive investigation and called in the EPA teams to give us an assistance for a possible emergency removal.
The request for assistance reached the Environmental Protection Agency's regional office in Philadelphia and the Office of Solid Waste and Emergency Response at EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. EPA sent in experts to sample air, water, and soil. They found contamination in open pools of water accessible to the public. Groundwater was running off the site, past the nearby mobile homes only 300 feet away. An unknown number of buried drums was leaking unknown contaminants into the soil and groundwater. There was a potential for fires or explosion or contamination of drinking water, and the Trailer Park Administration had already drawn up expansion plans, calling for new homes to be placed directly over the contaminated area.
Many of these substances are explosive in the drums, either by themselves. They have a low flash point. They can explode under very limited circumstances, or by interreacting with others, they can cause a very severe explosion.
William Hedeman administers the EPA's Superfund program.
It was very easy to take wastes that no one really knew what to do with and put them in a Cecil County type operation, or any of the other thousands of sites similar to that we're dealing with in the country.
Mr. Hedeman, tell us a little bit about the background of Superfund, where it came from, how it was established, how it operates.
Superfund was enacted into law at the end of 1980 in the last days of that Congress. It was in response to the problems that we had in Love Canal and other sites that began to come to the attention of the American people in the latter part of the 1970s, when there was a recognition that there was really no federal law that could deal with the problems of abandoned hazardous waste sites, and in addition, very few state laws that had that capability.
So Congress enacted a law to protect the public health and welfare. It created a $1.6 billion trust fund to deal with the problems of abandoned hazardous waste sites. 87% of the money in the trust fund comes from a tax on the chemical and petrochemical industries. The rest comes from general revenues. With Superfund, EPA now has the authority to help states that ask for assistance, as was the case in Cecil County.
Once EPA became involved in the project, because they have the equipment and the people who are very familiar with those type of sites, things did move much more rapidly. We worked together very closely on it. EPA, of course, had the on-scene coordinator that could provide all of the federal assistance and all the agencies that they had at their command. At the same time, the state agency has the authority to call in other agencies within the state and civil defense and the local people and the local health and all that to assist. And we planned out our strategy of who would be responsible for what. But I think it was an equal partnership between the two as to how we were going to manage and who was going to direct the activities on the site.
Under Superfund, site activities fall into 3 cleanup strategies: long-term remedial actions and the more rapid immediate removals and planned removals. The last 2 of these strategies were implemented in Cecil County.
We have the authority to fund a removal action at 100% federal expense if it is a life-threatening situation. If it is not life-threatening but has the potential of getting that way very quickly, we can enter into the 3rd category of response action under the law, which is called a planned removal, in which the state contributes 10% of the cost to correct the problem. The federal government, using the monies in the fund, would contribute 90%.
With the potential threat to public health and the environment in Cecil County, officials decided to begin Superfund operations as an immediate removal. The work began. Data was collected. Sampling showed hazardous organic compounds on site, including several carcinogens. There was evidence of low-level migration of contaminants off-site. The problems appeared more serious than first anticipated. So the operation moved into the next phase, planned removal. From the outset, community relations plans were prepared and followed for each phase of the work.
Someone locally was down here every day. You know, I was down here every day, a member of the health department was down here, and the public saw that too. And so they knew that, you know, it's not just the federal and state government handling this and the locals not knowing anything about it, you know.
Daniel Mahan is Director of Emergency Management for Cecil County. His office developed the standby community evacuation plans and helped allay the concerns of the people.
Well, initially I think they felt as though that they weren't being told everything, and 2, their primary concerns, as I saw them, was, you know, what harm or what damage could occur from what was there at the dump site, and what physical effects might it have upon themselves and their children. And again, through the efforts of the federal and state government, you know, we brought in experts from the Center of Disease Control, and then they had the people who knew and the experts who were quite capable of informing right here, telling them in person.
That is the key, I think, to these projects, that the citizens in the area need to know exactly what's going on. We had a meeting with them prior to starting any operation, at which time we showed them a film of a previous cleanup action so that they knew exactly what was going to take place. After we started and did site security, we had another meeting with them to tell them exactly what would take place next as far as the cleanup and what they'd see, the kind of equipment, the people. I mean, when you see people in moon suits, you get nervous. So we showed them what all that meant. We had bulletin boards there so they could read the daily progress reports, so they could come up to the site and read those reports.
We, the local people and the federal and state people, were in constant contact every day. We set up a rumor control line out of my office for the public to call in. We continually had news releases. We went on the radio, the local radio station, and advised the public as to what was going on. We had public hearings at different intervals to let them know each stage of what we were doing, what stage that the cleanup was in, and I'd tell you, I was really impressed with the way things occurred.
The people who are affected by the site are our primary concern. And each site, because of its unique characteristics, has a unique plan of itself that is developed as part of this whole operation.
They kept us all up to date on it. They're doing a good job.
They came around everybody's house and everything, just explaining what they're going to be doing.
So cleanup officials met with residents, explained the situation to them, paid visits to their homes. To further strengthen communication, officials maintained contact with the press. Don Herring is editor of the Cecil Whig.
Of course, they recognize the fact that that one way of keeping the community informed, and that's would be through the newspapers and through the radio and television stations. And they were quite good about calling us together from time to time. We had a number of press conferences right on the site, not actually on the site, but very near the site. And we were in touch with them. They were not difficult to reach. We don't see a lot of the federal government, really. So this was one of the few times, I think, when people got to see the federal government in action and what they could do, once they made their mind up.
With the people prepared and informed, local, state, and federal officials began to clean up the problem at the Cecil County site. Tom Massey was EPA's on-scene coordinator, responsible for this cleanup operation. Steve Cunningham is a private industry contractor who was hired by EPA to remove the hazardous materials.
You come here and you discover that you got a dump of toxic waste. What happens next?
Well, the first thing is to find out what you're dealing with. But more important than that is the direct threat contact of human exposure. In this particular case, we put up a cyclone fence to make sure that people wouldn't come into this area, in addition to the 24-hour surveillance that we had of this. So that's your top priority, is the protection of the people.
When you walked in here for the first time, did you know you had a serious problem?
We had a little bit of prior knowledge, and that was due to the state investigation that was conducted here. We had some idea there were buried drums in a wooded area, and there were 2 contaminated ponds that right located over here. But they contained about 9,000 gallons of contaminated water. Through the testing of the water, we found out it contained benzene, toluene, methylene chloride, trichloroethanes, organic compounds, something that you commonly use as degreasers or cleaning solvents. So we had an idea of where the material was, so we immediately set up an exclusion zone or a safety zone that we could work outside and still conduct all our activities inside. You've got to appreciate, John, what this place looked like. It seems like a long time ago, but just a few months now, that there were 50, 60 people involved on scene. There were hundreds of trucks being loaded, and there were backhoes moving back and forth. There were people walking around in these specialized safety gear. And all of this activity, we had one central point where they were cleared through into the hot zone, and as they finished work, they were cleared out. In fact, Steve and his people set up a truck decontamination procedure, a steam jenny that would take off any collected contamination that they might have picked up before they rolled off. So the bottom line was that anybody who left this hot zone was decontaminated, and we didn't carry it out of the hot zone.
Steve, one of the things that the people in the community obviously notice is that when your people are on the site, they're wearing tanks such as this one and protective gear. Why is all that equipment necessary?
Well, there's several reasons. First of all, as Tom mentioned before, we don't always know what we're dealing with. There was a variety of chemicals dumped here, and obviously it was done illegally, so there's not good record keeping available on what was dumped here. Enforcement people were able to find some records, and some sampling was done before we started the cleanup. And the other reason is we're working right on top of the situation, and when you bring it, there's air pollution before the ground is uncovered, and that was a problem. But when you have workers in there actually moving the drums around and standing right over the drums and sampling the drums, the vapors coming off then are many times what they would be 400 or 500 feet away, and that's why so much protection is needed.
When you came out here, you say that you expected 120 drums and ended up with 1,300. Why didn't you know better when you first came out to the site what was here, what you were dealing with?
Well, you have to appreciate the fact that we were going on an investigation and what hearsay of people who said there were 120 drums. The technology is not here today where you can come on scene and with a level of certainty determine underground how many drums you have. You have to go get them. And we never realized that when we started that they would be piled up 15 high. And the technology that we do have can just merely show that you have an area where drums are located. How thick they are, what's inside, how deep they are, how extensive the contamination is. The technology is just not here. So that each day that went on and the operations with the grappler and the backhoes just about right in here working, we were very surprised to see that they were piled up that high. So that our final count was close to 1,300.
What appeared to be a small problem turned into a complicated cleanup. Normally, small numbers of barrels would be packed in larger containers for transport to a disposal site. Since there were so many contaminated drums here, alternative methods were used. Compatible substances were mixed together in large 12,000-gallon chambers. Other materials were rendered harmless and recycled for fuel oil. The methods were innovative, safe, and cost-effective.
To give you an idea of the cost savings that was performed on scene, we had anticipated a per drum removal for 120 drums, which we thought we had here, to be approximately $1,500 per drum for removal. When we found out we had 1,300 drums and the vast amount of liquids we were dealing with, through this cost-saving operation, we were able to reduce the per unit drum disposal to less than $500.
You talked about the ponds over here. You had a bunch of water on the site. What'd you do about that?
Due to the ponds, the drainage of the ponds, it had to go someplace. And immediately we found that it just meandered right over the hill, down through the trailer park, 300 feet away. Contaminated water. So our immediate action with the security and the air pollution was to put in a filtering system, that is to stop the contaminated water from reaching down where the homes were. Our concern level for the air pollution problems was equally high. And along with our own safety protective gear while working in this area, we immediately set up an air monitoring system right in the resident areas to see if the pollution was reaching down to them. This just didn't stop with the air. We tested in the backyards of the people their soil. We tested the stream, water itself. We tested the sediments in the stream to see what kind of health concerns that the people could have been exposed with. Our utmost concern was the health and welfare of those people immediate to this site.
Now, you must have also had a big concern with talking to those people, communicating with them. They see you in your moon suits. They see somebody probing around their backyard. They see you filtering water. A year ago, they had some funny-looking ponds back here, and nobody worried about it. And now, all of a sudden, what you're telling them with all this action is, my gosh, there's really something bad up there. Communication must be a big part of a job like this.
I think that if you level with people of what you're faced with, tell them the facts as you have them, is the key to get a trust in the community. That's what makes, I think, our program so unique, that we have the capabilities through the law and through the working with the cooperating agencies to do these things as these problems are confronted, that we find solutions. When we ultimately removed 5 million pounds of contaminated soil, and that was the result of the drums leaking and the water further contaminating the surrounding soils. There was no air pollution coming off, there was no water pollution coming off, and there was no further ground contamination occurring by reason of the remaining soil on scene.
Now, you talk in terms of the site we're now on having a clay cap. Explain that to me.
We took out an enormous amount of material off this site, and we had a big space to fill. And first of all, we brought in just regular backfill, regular soil, and replaced what we had taken out to get the elevation of the site back up to a workable level where we could leave the site. And after we had reached a level with the backfilling, we brought in, it was determined that we would need an 18-inch clay cap, and we brought in thousands of tons of clay to be compacted down, and then finally a hydro seeder came in, and that's why you see the straw that is disked into the ground now. And this spring the grass will come up, and you'll have further erosion control.
And this spring, what we're standing in is going to be just another safe piece of territory here in Cecil County rather than what it was before.
Has an extra level of certainty and protection that the state and the federal government joined together to put monitoring wells on the outskirts of this fence line to give us a level of confidence that there isn't off-site migration, or that there could be any remaining levels of a concern, that we'll be monitoring this every 3 months. In addition to our feeling that we have removed the threat from this area.
Some of the drums that workers removed contained ignitable liquids and solids and sludges laced with PCBs. But today in Cecil County, where 1,300 drums had been buried, all immediate threat of exposure to hazardous materials is gone.
The public's reaction was about the same as mine. I was very impressed with the speed in which everything got done.
They've done a good job up there, I think.
They did get it done faster than expected.
They did a good job. They speed up on it. It could have never been better.
There was some feeling, I think, among the community that there's an awful lot of money for say, removing what the public perceives as a bunch of old rusty barrels. But as far as I know, no volunteers came forward to do it for nothing.
The cost of the Cecil County cleanup was about $900,000. The question is, was it worth it?
I think that these type of projects have to go forward. I don't think that you can find this type of degradation to the environment or potential to public health in the short term and possibly in the long term and not do anything about it. You have potential groundwater problems there, a resource of the state. You have a situation not far from the Chesapeake Bay, a major resource of the state. And you have the direct contact of the people.
The difficult part in all of this is finding the people responsible for the dumping. Voluntary industry-funded cleanup and cost recovery are important aspects of Superfund. But if EPA can't find a financially able responsible party, it starts cleanup action anyway, while searching for those responsible. Here in Cecil County, cost recovery is under negotiation.
We have been fairly successful in getting the cooperation of industry and other responsible parties in coming forth and voluntarily agreeing to undertake the cleanup operations at many of these sites. We have about $130 million of investment from the private sector into these cleanup operations that do not require any expenditure of the trust fund.
If this Cecil County situation had come up prior to Superfund's existing, what would have happened?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure what would have happened. The state may have done it if the Superfund had not been around. On the other hand, they may not have. And without that money and that fund source, I don't know how you handle these things.
Well, anytime you eliminate a public health threat, it was worth it. In this particular case, we removed over 50,000 pounds of contaminated liquid waste, highly toxic substances. We removed 5 million pounds of contaminated soil, treated over 100,000 gallons of contaminated water. In doing that, we removed the public health threat. Yes, it was worth it.
Very frankly, I feel like I am the messenger with the bad news at many of these sites. We had nothing to do with putting it there. We are coming to the public with a problem that was caused by somebody else. or many people. We find, though, that if we can sit down and talk and have the folks meet us halfway and understand that situation and understand what we're about and what we're trying to do and meet us in a reasonable, objective manner, that we can come very quickly to a mutual understanding and proceed from there.
It's quiet now. The heavy trucks, the bulldozers, the workers in moon suits, they're all gone. Life is back to normal. The state continues regular water and air monitoring of the area and will consult with EPA when they think it's safe to remove the cyclone fence. Meanwhile, in other parts of the country, Superfund work continues. Hundreds of hazardous waste sites are on a national priority list, an EPA list that ranks some of the worst sites needing attention. After watching a cleanup, you can appreciate the enormous complexities involved, the logistics, the newness of the technology. You realize how much easier it is to dump the waste than it is to remove it. If there is a good side to all this, it lies with the people who work together at the local, the state, and the federal level to clean up this site, and the community that pulled together to see their homes safe again. Perhaps the best result was noted by the editor of the Cecil County Whig, Don Herring.
I do think as a result of this, there is a more awareness. We've even gotten calls about, for instance, say, we see such and such trucks going down such and such road. They go back into the woods. What are they doing? Well, our response immediately is that we get in touch with some of the local officials and we find out what they're doing. We get a lot of people out there, they're watching. They're not about to let something like this happen again.